are presenting on cochlear implants. My name is Megan.
My name is Sally.
And I'm Zoe.
We're going to be talking about history and how the implants devices work and what the procedure is to get it and pros and cons of the implant. So I'm going to start off with the history. There's a long history, so I pick and choose what was the most important. Starting in 1967, I have Dr. Clark. Inspired by his close relationship with his father, he decided to start researching. And then by 1977, he received a grant. So that way, he kept experimenting and found with a blade of grass and a small turban shell, able to put a cochlear implant in the inner ear. 1978, the first recipient of cochlear implant was Rob Sanders. After by the first time it was able to be turned on, he was very excited because it was able to work. And he used a portable speech processor with a handheld microphone. And the second recipient was George Watson in 1980. By 1981, Paul Trainer developed the nucleus implant. And by 1982, the first implant was surgically implanted at the University of Melbourne. Finally, by 1984, everything was started in America. There was a small team established in Denver, Colorado. The FDA approved the 3M House implant for adults at the time, but adults only. By 1985, they had started clinical trials for cochlear implants on children ages 2 to 17. And by 1989, they started producing new processors. They had made a smaller one by then, so that way it was easier for children to access and carry along with them. By 1990, the FDA approved nuclear cochlear implants for the children all throughout. And by 1994, there was 10,000 recipients who had the surgery and implants in. From 1997 to 2010, they were improving on all the technology they had. In 1997, the first implant capable of providing measurements of the hearing. This allowed medical professionals to test their hearing, so it made it easier to know what percentages of loss of hearing they had in each ear. Also in 1997, the S Sprint came out. It was smaller, so it was easy to carry also. And then the following year, the first multi-channel BTE processor was introduced. And the same year, the Nucleus 24 cochlear implant was released also. In 2000, the ES Print 22 BET was the fourth upgrade of the Nucleus. And by 2001, there was 30,000 Nucleus recipients. 2002, the Nucleus 24 Contour Advance. This was unique because it had soft tip features to protect the delicate inner ear. Also that year, the ES Print 3G was introduced. This was the first processor that had the Telcor built in, so that way it made phone calls possible. Also in that year, the LAHA system, it was approved to treat single-sided deafness in the USA. Yeah. And then by 2003, the new ES Print 3G was released. It was the 5th generation, and they also had 60,000 Nucleus recipients around the world. By 2005, there was the Nucleus Freedom. This was the first cochlear implant that was waterproof. Also in that year was the Baja Divino. This is advanced digital sound. And then 2 years later in 2007, they released a second model of it. It had extra power and it would reduce the size. And by 2009, they had released the third generation, which even yet was even smaller. And it had 25% improved on speech and sound. And then by 2010, they had made another Cochlear Baja, which also reduces the time to, in the surgery, bond to the bones. That way it was faster turnout for being allowed to hear. And that's the history on the cochlear implant and how they've gotten to where they are now from the start.
Right now I'm going to talk to you guys about what a cochlear implant is. A cochlear implant is an electronic device that is surgically implanted under the skin. And just to clarify, it's not a hearing aid. Hearing aids amplify sounds when CI bypasses the damaged section of the ear, directly stimulating the auditory nerve. And then how does it work? There's two main parts. There's an external and internal. The external has a microphone, speech processor, and transmitter. The microphone, it picks up sound around you, and then it will send it to the processor. Here the processor analyzes the sound and sends it to the transmitter. Next, the transmitter, which is placed behind the ear, receives the sound. Then you go into the internal part of the device, which is the receiver and electrodes. The receiver is surgically placed behind the ear. The receiver takes the electrical sounds that were sent from the transmitter and passes the signals into the electrodes. Here the electrodes stimulate the fibers in your auditory nerve, giving the sensation of sound, not actual sound. And then I'm going to talk to you guys about the steps about getting a cochlear implant and what happens after. To get a cochlear implant, you first should probably talk to your primary doctor to see if it's the right fit for you, and they can refer you to a center in another facility that will put you in the next step. Then they'll determine if it will benefit you as an individual or not, and you'll undergo multiple tests, an audiological test, physiological test, and medical exams, and specific tests that are preferred by your surgeon. And then you'll undergo a lot of counseling to ensure that you're going to benefit and that you're understanding that it's a lengthy process before and after getting the implant. After the surgery is complete, there's about a 4 to 6 week recovery stage. This can take a while, sometimes longer for certain people, depending on like your healing. I don't know. And then after that, you're going to have a checkup to get your external parts fitted for your cochlear implant. And this can take a few days because they have to tweak it and get it right with all the mapping and getting the sounds to fit you personally. And then after everything's working out and it's fitting okay, you'll work with multiple specialists on speech and listening, because for some people they were born deaf, so it's new to them, and some people lost their hearing, and so it's a different kind of sound, and it's kind of, they have to start over, and it's really interesting.
I'm going to talk about the pros and cons. I decided to talk about the cons first because I wanted to end on a brighter note. So first you have to talk about the risks from the surgery itself. When I was researching this, it was kind of like shocking. I found out that any kind of surgery that you have where you go under general anesthesia, you do risk some people, everyone reacts differently to general anesthesia, and some people can be like allergic to it. And so it just kind of depends on how your own body will react to that. When I was researching, I also found out that the facial nerve can be damaged from this surgery. You also risk an infection when the surgery is complete. There are a bunch of other side effects that come along with it. One that I never heard before was apparently your cochlear implant can get really cold in the winter and can cause really bad headaches. So I thought that was really interesting. Some more side effects are that it can actually damage your taste nerve, and these are actually pretty rare, but they are possible. Your body can actually totally reject the implant, and that kind of goes along with infection as well. And then after you do have the cochlear implant surgery, You cannot have an MRI because of the magnetics involved in it, so it kind of restricts you in that sense. And then also, one last thing I found, that sometimes the magnetics in the implant can set off different alarms. So if you're like in a mall and you go out the doors and like the theft alarm goes off, and it's like, what, I'm not stealing anything, you know? So I thought that was really interesting. And then the cons of, another con that is like a really big one, and it's really controversial in deaf culture. And that's because if you were born deaf and you really like grew up and socialized in the deaf community, and then you get a cochlear implant and then you think, okay, I'm hearing now, and you just totally shun the deaf culture, it's kind of seen as like obviously really bad, because that was your identity and it was like a big part of who you are. And so a lot of deaf people think negative things about a cochlear implant because if you don't use it as a tool, then it becomes just like a way to shun who you were and all this like great culture that you were a part of. And you know, now if you decide to not be a part of that anymore, they really see that as really offensive. Now I'm going to talk about the pros. I think some of the obvious ones are, I'm sure you've all seen videos on YouTube of a child getting a cochlear implant and turning it on for the first time and being able to hear their parents' voices, you know, things like that. And I think it's important to know that it does take time to relearn, like Sally said, the hearing and the sounds. In my deaf culture class, we had a speaker. His name was Jason, and he had a cochlear implant. And he did not sign his presentation. He spoke the whole thing. And I thought that was really cool because I would have had no idea that he was deaf. And it was like a really positive result of the cochlear implant. And he gave us the example that when he got his cochlear implant, he was in his garage, I believe, and he heard something and he didn't know what it was. And when he was like really confused, and he had to ask his neighbor, and his neighbor told him that it was actually birds chirping. And he actually became deaf later in life, and it just like the sound was so different with the cochlear implant that he had to kind of like relearn all of that. And so he, like something so normal that we hear every day, you know, birds chirping, is gonna sound like completely different. And then obviously some other good things about it are many people they have a lot of satisfaction with answering telephones. They can hear alarms, things that we hear on like a daily basis. And then another pro about it that I think that I learned from Jason, the speaker, he is still really, really involved in deaf culture because he was really involved when he was deaf, and he learned ASL, and he still goes to deaf events, and it's still like a big part of who he is. And so I think that that's really, really important. And I was actually talking to Franz. You guys might know him. He's a student here. And I asked him what he thought about cochlear implants, and he said that it can be used as a tool, much like a hearing aid. He doesn't really see it as, you know, shunning the deaf community unless you get one and then you kind of just like don't like involve yourself in the deaf community anymore. So I think it's important to know that obviously not all deaf people shun cochlear implants, and I think that it is good to see it as a tool. And that's kind of my opinion. I think you use it as a tool and you stay involved in the community. I think it's like a possibility, and I think it's really important to know that it is up to each individual person for their decision, and that's something that you have to decide for yourself. And now I'm going to show a video clip, and this is a woman who, she actually changed her opinion about cochlear implants completely, and so I think she has a really good view on cochlear implants. It's captioned.
Hi, I'm Ann.